The soft hum of jazz filled the air of La Maison Elegance, one of Los Angeles's most exclusive fine dining restaurants. Crystal chandeliers draped the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting a warm glow over white linen tables where celebrities, moguls, and power players indulged in the finest cuisine money could buy. Tonight was no different. The restaurant was packed with Hollywood elites, their laughter and conversation blending into the symphony of clinking wine glasses and silverware, slicing through perfectly seared steaks. At the host's stand, James Calloway, a seasoned waiter with a sharp tongue and an even sharper ego, adjusted his cufflinks as he glanced toward the entrance. He had worked at La Maison for nearly a decade, serving billionaires and A-list celebrities alike. He prided himself on knowing who mattered and who didn't. After all, in a place like this, status was everything. As James scanned the floor, his eyes landed on a man stepping through the grand double doors. Clad in a simple hoodie and jeans, the newcomer didn't fit the restaurant's usual clientele. He looked out of place, an everyday guy who had somehow wandered into a world where he didn't belong. James scoffed under his breath. Another wannabe who thinks money can buy class. The man walked up to the host's stand, adjusting his hood slightly. James barely looked at him as he asked, "Do you have a reservation?" The guest nodded. "Yeah, should be under K. Duckworth." James typed into the system, his expression unreadable. The name didn't ring a bell. That was all he needed to confirm his assumption. This guy wasn't a VIP. "Sorry, sir. We're fully booked tonight." His tone was clipped, dismissive. The man raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? My assistant made the reservation a week ago." James folded his arms, looking him up and down. "Look, I don't know how you got in here, but this isn't some burger joint. We cater to a different kind of crowd." He smirked slightly, enjoying the small power trip. The man exhaled, shaking his head. "I see how it is." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then placed it against his ear. James raised an eyebrow, curious. A few moments later, the restaurant manager, Eleanor Harris, a woman known for her unshakable professionalism, emerged from the back. Her sharp gaze swept across the room before locking onto the hooded man. The moment she saw him, her eyes widened in horror. "Mr. Lamar," she gasped, practically sprinting toward him. James' heart stopped. "K. Duckworth, Kendrick Lamar Duckworth." Kendrick Lamar, the Pulitzer Prize-winning rapper, the global icon, the man who had just been insulted and turned away by James Calloway. And now, James was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. James felt his stomach drop as the realization hit him. Kendrick Lamar, not just a celebrity but a living legend, an artist who had shaped culture, won countless awards, and had the respect of millions worldwide. Eleanor's panicked expression made it clear. James had just committed the worst mistake of his career. I'm so sorry, Mr. Lamar," she stammered, stepping between Kendrick and the stunned waiter. "There must be a misunderstanding. Your table is absolutely ready. Please, right this way." Kendrick gave James a long, unreadable stare before nodding. "All right then." Eleanor turned on her heel, motioning for Kendrick to follow. As he walked past, James stood frozen in place, his jaw clenched. He wanted to disappear, but his nightmare wasn't over yet. Just as Kendrick was about to move toward his table, he paused and turned back. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as he looked James in the eye. "You judge people by how they look, huh?" Kendrick asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge of something deeper. James swallowed. He could feel the stares of the other diners, the staff, and his own manager drilling into him. I didn't realize," James began, but Kendrick raised a hand, silencing him effortlessly. "That's the problem," Kendrick said. "You didn't even take a second to think before deciding who I was. That's how people miss out on real greatness." James couldn't respond. He felt his palms grow sweaty as Kendrick finally turned away, following Eleanor to his table. The moment the rapper was out of earshot, Eleanor spun toward James, her eyes blazing. "In my office. Now." James gulped. He knew that whatever was coming next wouldn't be good. James followed Eleanor into her office, his hands clammy and his mind racing. The restaurant manager shut the door with a sharp click before rounding on him, her arms crossed and her expression stone cold. "What the hell were you thinking?" she hissed. James opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He knew better than to make excuses, but still, his ego wouldn't let him go down without a fight. I just thought he was some random guy trying to sneak in without a reservation," James muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor scoffed. "A random guy? That random guy is Kendrick freaking Lamar, one of the most influential artists of our time. A man who could buy this entire restaurant if he wanted to. And you treated him like a nobody." James clenched his jaw, looking away. He had made mistakes before, but this was different. This wasn't just a rich guest getting annoyed over slow service. This was public relations suicide. Eleanor continued, stepping closer. "Do you know how many celebrities eat here? Do you know how much of our business relies on word of mouth? If Kendrick decides to tell the world about this, our reputation will be destroyed." James knew she was right. In today's world, one viral tweet, one Instagram post, or one bad review from a celebrity could ruin even the most exclusive restaurant. Eleanor sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look, James, you've been a good waiter. You know how to handle high-profile guests. But if you let your ego cloud your judgment, you don't belong here." James swallowed hard. Are you firing me?" Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "No, not yet. But you're walking on thin ice. And you're going to fix this." James frowned. "How?" "You're going to personally serve Kendrick's table, and you're going to make damn sure he gets the best experience of his life. If he leaves here happy, maybe, just maybe, you'll still have a job." James exhaled sharply. He didn't like the idea of groveling, but he had no choice. He had to make this right. With a nod, he turned toward the door. "All right, I'll make it up to him." "See that you do," Eleanor said. "Because if you mess this up, you're done." James stepped out of the office, took a deep breath, and headed toward Kendrick Lamar's table. James smoothed his uniform and took a deep breath before approaching Kendrick Lamar's table. The rapper sat comfortably in a private booth near the window, the city skyline glittering in the background. Across from him was a woman James vaguely recognized, probably a close friend or business associate. Kendrick leaned back in his chair, casually scrolling through his phone, as if the earlier insult hadn't rattled him at all. But James knew better. Celebrities didn't always react immediately. Sometimes, they let their words or actions do the talking later, when the damage couldn't be undone. James cleared his throat. "Mr. Lamar," he said, his voice unusually formal. "I'd like to personally apologize for the earlier misunderstanding. It was unprofessional, and I take full responsibility." Kendrick barely looked up. "Misunderstanding, huh?" James shifted uncomfortably. "I misjudged the situation. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I let my assumptions get the best of me. That was wrong." Kendrick tapped his fingers against the table, still not giving James the satisfaction of an easy resolution. The woman across from him smirked but said nothing, watching the exchange like a spectator at a boxing match. Finally, Kendrick put his phone down. "So, what now?" James forced a smile. "Now, I make sure you get the best service we have to offer. Complimentary dishes, wine pairings, whatever you'd like." Kendrick raised an eyebrow. "Oh? So now I'm important enough for good service." James swallowed hard. "Sir, you've always been important. I just didn't recognize you." A silence settled over the table. Then Kendrick chuckled, a low, knowing laugh. "That's real funny, 'cause I ain't never needed to be recognized to deserve respect." James' face burned with embarrassment. He had walked right into that one. But before James could respond, Kendrick leaned forward. "Tell me something," he said. "What made you look at me and decide I wasn't worth your time?" James hesitated. The truth sat heavy on his tongue, but he knew he had to own up to it. "I saw a guy in a hoodie and jeans," he admitted, "and I assumed you weren't the type who comes here." Kendrick studied him for a moment, then nodded. "At least you're honest." The rapper exhaled, glancing at the woman across from him, who gave him a small shrug. Then he looked back at James. "Aight," Kendrick said. "I'll take that service you're offering. But not 'cause I need it. 'Cause I want to see if you're actually as good as you think you are." James nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." As he turned to retrieve the menus, he could feel Kendrick's eyes on him. He wasn't just serving dinner tonight. He was being tested. And he had one chance to get it right. James returned with the menus, his hands steady but his mind racing. Every move he made now mattered. He had served high-profile clients before, but none had ever tested him like this. He placed the wine list in front of Kendrick and the woman. "May I start you off with a recommendation?" Kendrick barely glanced at the list. "Nah, you tell me. What's good?" James took a breath, shifting into the role he knew best. "For tonight's selections, we have a 2006 Chateau Margaux, a deep, velvety red that pairs beautifully with the Wagyu filet. If you prefer something lighter, the Screaming Eagle Sauvignon Blanc is crisp and refreshing." Kendrick nodded slowly. "That Wagyu filet? Tell me about it." James didn't hesitate. "It's A5 grade, imported directly from Japan, seared to perfection with a garlic herb butter, served with black truffle mashed potatoes and a red wine reduction." The woman across from Kendrick smirked. "Damn, you sure you ain't the one cooking?" James allowed himself a small smile. "Just making sure you get the full experience." Kendrick leaned back, his fingers tapping against the table. "Aight, bring us both the Wagyu. Medium rare." "Yes, sir. And that 2006 Chateau Margaux," Kendrick added. "Let's see if it's as good as you say." James nodded. "Excellent choice." As he turned to place the order, he heard Kendrick chuckle softly behind him. "See? That wasn't so hard." James exhaled as he walked toward the kitchen. Maybe he still had a chance to turn this around. But he had no idea what was coming next. Back in the kitchen, James placed the order with the head chef, making sure every detail was perfect. He knew that this meal had to be flawless, not just for Kendrick's satisfaction, but for his own redemption. As he stepped back onto the restaurant floor, James couldn't help but notice the way the energy in the room had shifted. Several diners had recognized Kendrick by now, whispering and sneaking glances in his direction. Some even pulled out their phones, discreetly trying to snap pictures. James swallowed. This wasn't just a meal anymore, it was a spectacle. When he returned to the table with the 2006 Chateau Margaux, he poured the deep, rich wine into Kendrick's glass with careful precision. The wrapper swirled the glass, lifted it to his nose, and took a slow sip. For a moment there was silence. Then Kendrick smirked. "Not bad." James exhaled, relieved. One hurdle down. But before he could step away, something unexpected happened. A well-dressed older man from another table, clearly a regular, approached Kendrick's booth with a fake smile plastered across his face. "Excuse me, young man," the man said, in a tone dripping with condescension. "I couldn't help but notice the commotion around your table. You must be someone important." James immediately sensed trouble. He could tell by Kendrick's posture, calm, but slightly stiff, that the rapper wasn't amused. The woman across from Kendrick raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" The man chuckled, oblivious to how tone-deaf he sounded. "I mean, no offense. It's just, well, you don't exactly look like the typical clientele here." James froze. This was exactly the kind of judgment he himself had made earlier. And now he was watching someone else make the same mistake. Right in front of Kendrick. Kendrick put down his glass and looked the man dead in the eye. "Let me guess," he said. "You want to know who I am?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "Just curiosity, of course." Kendrick exhaled and leaned forward. "I'm Kendrick Lamar," he said, his voice low and controlled. "And you?" The man blinked, his confidence wavering. "Oh, I'm Richard Callahan. I own several properties in Beverly Hills. Big investor." Kendrick nodded slowly. "Cool. You see, I never had to ask who you were. 'Cause I don't need to know your money to respect you." Richard's face turned red. He stammered something under his breath before awkwardly excusing himself and walking away. James felt a chill run down his spine. That was supposed to be me. Kendrick turned back to James. You see that? He asked. James nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Good, Kendrick said. Now, let's see if that steak's as good as you hyped it up to be. James nodded quickly and rushed off to the kitchen. But something had shifted inside him. This wasn't just about keeping his job anymore. This was about learning a lesson he'd never forget. James moved quickly through the restaurant, weaving between tables with practiced grace. When he reached the kitchen, he pulled aside the head chef, Marco, a culinary genius with a reputation for perfection. Table 7's order, make sure it's flawless, James said, his voice tight with urgency. Marco smirked, already slicing a perfect cut of a 5 Wagyu. I know how to do my job, Calloway. You just make sure you don't mess up serving it. James exhaled. Yeah, I got it. Minutes later, the plates were ready. Glistening, perfectly cooked Wagyu fillets, plated with black truffle mashed potatoes and a delicate red wine reduction. The aroma alone was enough to make anyone's mouth water. James carefully placed the dishes on a silver tray and made his way back to Kendrick's table. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. This was his moment to redeem himself. He arrived at the table and, with the finesse of a seasoned professional, set the plates down. Your Wagyu filet medium rare, accompanied by truffle mashed potatoes, and our house red wine reduction. Kendrick looked down at the dish, then back at James. That's a good-looking steak. James gave a respectful nod. Only the best for our guests, sir. Kendrick picked up his knife and fork and cut into the steak. The knife slid through like butter. A perfect pink center revealed itself, glistening under the soft glow of the chandeliers. The woman across from Kendrick took a bite first. Her eyes widened, and she let out a low hum of approval. Damn, this might be the best steak I've ever had. Kendrick took his first bite. The moment the Wagyu touched his tongue, James felt the entire restaurant hold its breath. Kendrick chewed slowly, nodding as he let the flavors settle. Then he looked up at James. He said. That's fire. James exhaled, his chest loosening with relief. He had done it. Kendrick took another bite, then chuckled to himself. Crazy, ain't it? Just a few minutes ago you didn't even want me in here. Now you out here making sure I get the best meal in the house. James winced. The truth of Kendrick's words cut deeper than he expected. I was wrong, James admitted. About you. About a lot of things. Kendrick studied him for a moment, then nodded. That's what matters. Not just saying it, but knowing it. James stood there, feeling something he hadn't expected, humility. As Kendrick and his guest continued eating, James stepped back, watching the man he had once dismissed enjoy the finest meal he had ever served. But the night wasn't over yet, because Kendrick had one last surprise in store. James watched from a distance as Kendrick and his guest enjoyed their meal. The restaurant buzzed around them, but their table was the center of gravity. Every eye subtly drawn to the legend in their midst. He had done his job. The meal was perfect, the service was flawless, and most importantly, he had made up for his mistake. Or so he thought. As Kendrick wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, he leaned back in his chair, looking directly at James. With a small motion of his hand, he gestured for him to come over. James approached, standing upright, doing his best to maintain a professional demeanor. Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Lamar? Kendrick smirked. Yeah, you did good. James nodded. I'm glad to hear that. Kendrick reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and laid a thick stack of $100 bills on the table. James' eyes widened slightly, but he didn't react. He had served his fair share of high-profile clients, and big tips weren't unusual. But then Kendrick did something unexpected. He pushed the stack toward James. I want you to have this, Kendrick said, his voice calm but firm. James hesitated. Sir, that's way too much. Kendrick raised an eyebrow. Oh, so now you got standards for who you take money from? James flushed with embarrassment. No, sir, it's just... Kendrick tapped the stack of cash. I ain't giving you this 'cause I liked the steak. I'm giving it to you, 'cause I want you to remember this night. James swallowed. Kendrick leaned forward. You judged me the moment I walked in. Thought I ain't belong here. Thought I wasn't your kind of customer. He tapped the side of his temple. But I remembered that. James felt his throat tighten. Kendrick continued. So take this money, not as a tip, but as a reminder. A reminder that you never really know who you're talking to. James didn't know what to say. He looked at the stack of cash, feeling something strange stir in his chest. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the lesson. For the first time that night, James truly understood what Kendrick had been trying to teach him. Humbled, he reached out and took the stack of bills. Thank you, sir. Kendrick nodded. Don't thank me. Just do better next time. And with that, Kendrick stood up, adjusted his hoodie, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving James forever changed. But just when James thought the night was over, his manager, Eleanor, appeared behind him, and she had a look on her face that made his stomach drop. James turned slowly, his fingers still gripping the thick stack of bills Kendrick had left him. Eleanor's expression was unreadable. A mix of exhaustion, irritation, and something else he couldn't quite place. She exhaled sharply, arms crossed. So, how much did he tip you? James hesitated, then slowly lifted the stack. A lot. Eleanor eyed the money, then looked back at him. And do you know why he gave it to you? James swallowed. Yeah, I do. Eleanor nodded slowly. Good. Because if you ever pull something like that again, if you ever judge a guest before you even say hello, you won't be getting a second chance. James felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. I understand, he said quietly. Eleanor studied him for a moment longer, then sighed. Honestly, I don't know if I should fire you or promote you. That was the worst first impression I've ever seen. And somehow, you managed to salvage it. James let out a weak chuckle. Yeah, well, I had a good teacher tonight. Eleanor gave him a knowing look. You got lucky. Real lucky. If Kendrick Lamar had decided to post about what happened tonight, we'd be dealing with a PR nightmare right now. James nodded, fully aware of how close he had come to ruining both his career and the restaurant's reputation. Eleanor sighed again. All right, go home, Calloway. Think about what happened tonight. And when you come back tomorrow, be better. James hesitated, then nodded. I will. As he turned to leave, he felt the weight of the night settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just about saving his job. It was about learning a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. He had judged a man by his appearance. He had assumed status was everything. And he had been completely, utterly wrong. James glanced down at the stack of cash in his hands. It wasn't just a tip. It was a reminder, and he would never forget it. But just when he thought his night couldn't get any crazier, his phone buzzed in his pocket. When he pulled it out, his heart nearly stopped. Because trending on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok was a video of Kendrick Lamar talking about what had happened at La Maison Elegance. James felt his stomach drop. Oh no. James stared at his phone screen, his fingers trembling slightly as he clicked on the video. His heart pounded in his chest. The clip, posted just minutes ago, was already going viral. The video started with Kendrick sitting in his car, his face partially lit by the soft glow of the streetlights. His voice was calm, but there was weight behind every word. You know, it's crazy how people treat you different when they don't know who you are. James felt a lump form in his throat. Kendrick continued, walked into this fancy spot tonight, just me. No entourage, no chains, no designer suit, just me in a hoodie and jeans. And first thing I get? A dude at the front telling me I don't belong. James squeezed his eyes shut. That was him. The video cut to a shot of Kendrick shaking his head. Ain't nothing new. I've been black in America long enough to know how this go. People see what they want to see. Think they know who you are before you even say a word. The comments under the video were exploding. This, the realest dude in the game. Kendrick teaching lessons even outside the booth. Which restaurant was this? We boycotting or what? James' stomach twisted into knots. If the restaurant got named in the comments, it could be a disaster. But Kendrick wasn't done. Now, I could have flipped out, he said, leaning forward in the video. I could have put dude on blast, had the whole internet tearing him apart. But nah. Sometimes people just need to learn. And tonight, he learned. James' breath hitched. Kendrick gave a small chuckle. To the waiter who thought I didn't belong? Bet you think different now? Huh. James swallowed hard. The video ended with Kendrick looking straight into the camera. Lesson for tonight. Respect ain't about what somebody wearing. It ain't about how much money they got. Respect is about how you treat people, no matter what. The video cut out. James sat there stunned. His entire career had been hanging in the balance, and Kendrick Lamar had just spared him. Kendrick could have destroyed him, could have dragged his name, the restaurant, everything. But instead, he turned it into a lesson. A lesson James would never forget. Eleanor walked up behind him, arms crossed. Well? James turned to her, his face pale. I think I just got saved. She exhaled, shaking her head. You got lucky. Now don't waste it. James nodded slowly. He looked back down at the cash Kendrick had left him. It wasn't just a tip. It wasn't just a lesson. It was a second chance. And this time he wouldn't mess it up.